And we're continuing now with Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri. He's the author of the new book, Manhood, the Masculine Virtues America Needs. And Senator Hawley, I would be remiss if I didn't get you to comment on some of the things happening in this town, in Washington, and around our country, if you don't mind. First, the debt ceiling negotiation won by Speaker Kevin McCarthy, excuse me. Where do you stand on this? Senate sort of took a back seat to this whole thing. First of all, let me ask, were you okay with Mitch McConnell and Senate leadership's position on this, where you didn't really have much to say? You just sort of let Kevin McCarthy and Joe Biden handle it themselves?
Well, I mean, I can't speak for the minority leader. I think that was an acknowledgement on his part that McCarthy is probably the most important member of Republican leadership in Washington right now. I mean, he leads a House where he has a majority. So I think it's just an acknowledgement that McCarthy is really, when it comes to Republican leadership anyway, and he really sits in the captain's seat. I was glad that the president finally decided to negotiate after, 100 days of stalling on this thing. And, I think Kevin certainly worked very hard on it.
I know that there are a lot of Republicans in the House whom you admire, most specifically gentlemen like Chip Roy of Texas, who are very skeptical of this deal. It looks like they're not going to be supporting it. Do you think Kevin McCarthy could have done better?
Well, if you're asking me if I will support it, the answer is no. I'm not going to support it, and I'll tell you why. I said beforehand that I wanted to see, as part of any debt ceiling increase, some real effort to address our structural trade deficits, particularly with China. Every dollar that we spend on the trade deficits, which are massive and they are endemic, is a dollar that is invested in the Chinese military, that is invested in Chinese industry, that is them stealing our technology and taking our jobs. We have got to produce things in this country again. We've never been able to put our fiscal house in order. We've got to get working people back to work. We've got to empower them, take care of working families. So until we see something that actually addresses, I think, our most serious structural deficit, which is our trade deficit, I'm not going to sign off on trillions of dollars more in higher spending. So I won't be supporting it.
Well, Senator Hawley, I'm glad that you focused in on China there, because it seems like any time our number one adversary, China, is raised to President Biden, he seems to bend over backwards to apologize and make excuses for China, even with the COVID-19 pandemic that they thrust upon the world. He doesn't want any investigation into the actual origins of it. Do you think, based on everything that we've learned now, that President Biden has, to be generous, a blind spot when it comes to China?
Oh, no doubt about it. And you have to ask why. And I think this is part of what the House Republicans are trying to get to the bottom of with their various investigations. We know his family has made an unbelievable sum of money off of China while he has been in office as senator, as vice president, now as president, which is really extraordinary. I don't know if there is a precedent for that in American history. But yes, when it comes to China, this administration's let China eat our lunch. I mean, Joe Biden's policies are helping China. They're making China rich. They're making America poor. Take his so-called climate policies. What do they amount to? Making us dependent on China for their solar panels, for their electric batteries, for their infrastructure. Meanwhile, we are getting poorer. We are turning off our energy production. We are putting our blue-collar workers out of work. It's insane. It's totally backwards. And this is one of many reasons that Biden has to go.
Senator Hawley, I'd like to turn to a topic that actually is related to your book, Manhood, the Masculine Virtues America Needs, and that has to do with the transgender movement in America right now, specifically how it pertains to our children and to legislation. Your state of Missouri earlier this month actually approved significant restrictions on these procedures. Is it, and state by state has been doing this, is it time for a federal law on this?
Yes, and I think it's time for a federal law that will allow victims of these procedures who were not adequately informed of the risks, who were not adequately informed about the sterilization that will occur, who did not have, if they're minors, their parents' consent. We should allow them to sue. We should give them a federal right to sue the so-called doctors, to sue the medical providers, to sue if there are universities involved, to sue those institutions. I would say to the transgender lobby out there, which is incredibly powerful, if they truly are abiding by all of the medical recommendations and appropriate procedures, then they have nothing to fear. They should support the right of parents and patients to get into court and vindicate their rights. But I think we should start by holding these people accountable and giving victims the right to get into court and to sue when they've been harmed.
And actually that extends to the question of protecting women's sports. Again, something that all men should support. Where do you think things stand now with regard to Capitol Hill and whether the Senate might step up and take up the House's bill that would protect women exclusively with regard to Title IX protections?
We should absolutely vote on it. Now, you notice the Democrats don't want to. I mean,
Yeah.
they don't want to touch this. They don't want anything to do with it, even as they completely capitulate to the radical leftist transgender lobby. I mean, the truth is, if you think biological men should be in women's sports, should be in women's locker room, you are so far out of the mainstream. The American people don't want this, and it doesn't depend on party. Democrats, independents, Republicans, they don't want it. Parents don't want it. They want their girls to actually have their sports. How many years did it take to get just equal funding for girls' sports? And now the left, in one fell swoop, is going to destroy them because of an ideology that nobody agrees with. So we ought to vote on it. We absolutely ought to protect in law women's sports. No biological men in women's sports. Protect girls in their locker rooms so that they're safe. This is common sense stuff. And if Democrats won't even bring it to a vote, I think it tells you how scared they are to be accountable to the American people.
I'd love to sort of drill down a little bit on that, because the last thing you said there seems to get lost in the mix. A lot of people think, oh, this is about giving young women the opportunity to compete and maybe get scholarships, athletic scholarships, and that's true. But protecting our daughters and our sisters in their locker room seems like a basic thing that a man would want to do. Men's voices need to be clearer on this, shouldn't they, sir?
Particularly fathers. I mean, listen, I've got a little girl at home. She's just 2 years old. I mean, my little baby, my youngest. And I can't imagine sending her one day to school and having the administration at that school tell me, oh, by the way, there's going to be men, there's going to be 16-year-old, 17-year-old boys who say that they're girls, identify, quote unquote, as girls, and they're going to be in the locker room with your daughter. No, that is not safe for her. That is not safe for any woman. They shouldn't be put through this. It is amazing to me how the people who are asked to bear all of the risk, all of the danger, are women in this entire radical leftist agenda.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, the biological men in sports destroys women's sports. Biological men in locker rooms, who does it endanger? Women. So it is really a war on women from the left in the service, again, to a radical gender ideology that almost nobody agrees with in the country. It is extraordinary. We need to protect women. It's a basic safety issue. Frankly, it's a moral issue. Women should have their own spaces, their own sports. I thought that was settled. We ought to protect that.
American consumers have been voting with their dollars over the last month or so, and I hate to tread too rough on your state of Missouri, the home of Anheuser-Busch, but boy, Budweiser is certainly getting a message. Is this what conservatives need to do? We've never been the boycott types.
Well, it's certainly having an effect. And whether they're talking about that or talking about Target or I guess now Kohl's, I do think it is absolutely time for conservatives to say we are not going to take this anymore from these corporations. We are not going to have them shove their radical social agenda down our throats. By the way, at the same time, many of these companies have been happy to gut American jobs, send them overseas, decimate our communities, and now they want to lecture us on social responsibility. It is absolutely ridiculous. It is outrageous. And I'm glad to see parents across the country saying, we're not going to put up with it. We're not going to take it. We're not going to shop there. We're not going to go to Target. We're not going to go to wherever. If they're going to push this radical ideology on us, we don't have to buy your products. You know, nothing obliges us to do so. I'm glad to see conservatives stand up.
Finally, Senator Hawley, as we get into a pretty hot and heavy Republican nomination process after the announcement from Governor DeSantis last week, I wonder if you could just sort of give your observations here about how we can get through this process, get a nominee who can win, and not be so bloodied by the end of the process that we don't even have a Republican consensus left in this country.
Well, I'll just tell you that my view is that Donald Trump is going to be the nominee. You know, maybe I'll be wrong about that, but I don't think so. I mean, I think Donald Trump is going to be the nominee, and no offense to anybody else who's in the field. You know, good luck to all of them. But I do believe that the ex-president is going to be the nominee. And I think that the critical thing is we've got to unite around an agenda that will make this country strong again. We have got to unite around an agenda that will put our workers first, that will get good paying jobs back in this country, that will stand up to big pharma and big tech and the multinational woke corporations that have sold us out in favor of China. We have got to put this country once again in a place of strength. And I think that is what this campaign is going to be about.
Senator Josh Hawley from the Show Me State of Missouri, thanks for joining us. I couldn't remember if it was the show. Of course it's the Show Me State. It's Missouri. There's more to come on O'Connor Tonight.